Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bill Atkins. I'm speaking on behalf of the English Literature Teaching Team, part of the English team over here at Wigston and Queen Elizabeth College. Thank you for joining me for this taster about the English A-level, English Literature A-level. What I'm going to do is go through a little bit about the course in the next half hour, give you a small sample of what a lesson's like. It's a little bit of an artificial sample, really, because I'm going to take questions at the end, ask you to do some thinking about one of the slides that I'll show you. But what I really want you to get out of this, and do ask questions if you need to at the end, particularly, we've got an interactive question and answer board kind of thing here, is making sure that you feel comfortable that English literature is the course that you want to do and that you've signed up for the right thing. I firmly believe, as I do think most of my colleagues believe, that if you pick the A levels that you're really enthusiastic about, you've got a real genuine love and interest for, they're going to be the A levels that you're the most successful on, and you'll get the most out of, both in terms of grade and actual just enjoyment of the subject. So hopefully I can pass over some of my enthusiasm for this wonderful subject to you guys in the course of the next half hour. And as I say, towards the end, we'll stop and you can ask me questions and I shall try and answer as much as possible. I'm actually in charge of the English literature course. I'm a subject leader for this subject, and I've been teaching English literature at A level for quite some time, before many of you were born. I won't go into the years specifically. You don't need to know how old I am. Fairly old. Let's leave it at that. David Tennant is here as our welcoming sight as you come onto this session, this lesson, and he's there with a really famous, iconic scene from the great play Shakespeare's Hamlet, which is one of the texts that we teach during this course. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide. Okay, um, so what does English A-level literature involve in terms of the text that we teach and the kind of things that you do? I'm just going to focus on year one at first, because I think if I give you too much information about year two, all in one go as well as year one, it'll be like information overload. And if you've sat through 2 or 3 of these sessions already today, you've probably got enough information swirling around your head. Well, like all good English literature A-level courses, it's got some element of Shakespeare in there. We study Hamlet for this the spec we teach, which is an OCR A-level English literature. It's arguably Shakespeare's best play. Some critics put it up there as his best play. It's a really interesting play. It is a tragedy, but surprisingly for a tragedy, it's got quite a bit of humour. We spend a lot of time going through that with one of your teachers during the year. We spend quite some time going through the detail of the play, and we kind of prepare you over the course of the year to answer 2 mini essay questions when you get to the end of the second year and you're doing your actual final A-level exams. And the 2 questions are, one is a little scene kind of analysis of a short extract from the play, and the other is an essay which invites you to look at a theme or a character and the way Shakespeare has characterized or portrayed, represented this theme. So Hamlet's a really broad play. It touches on so many things about being a human being, which is kind of a core interest for a lot of literature we teach. I often tell students that literature is all lies, but it's lies that are told to reveal a deeper truth about what it is to be a human being alive in the world that we live in and to interact with other people in society and nature, the whole world around us. And Hamlet is a great text for doing that. It raises so many questions and gets you to think about so many different things. We also, in the first year, look at 15 poems by Christina Rossetti. She's a mid-Victorian poet. And we're preparing you for a question there where you're going to compare that with a play, Henrik Ibsen's The Doll's House. So they're both, the selected poems by Christina Rossetti really is kind of mid-Victorian, 1850s, 1860s, and Ibsen's a bit later, 1880s, 1890s, but they've got some great things in common. They're both really concerned with the female position of people in society at that point in time, changing society, the way that life for a lot of people was beginning to change and evolve, and the old certainties of a previous way of life were beginning to evaporate and fade. And they also look at relationships and family. the things that are core to all of our being and our central experience of what it is to be alive. So those two elements there, the Shakespeare element and the drama and the pre-19th century poetry, they make up your paper one. And we spend a lot of time in year one preparing you for paper one. We, of course, go back and revise some of that during the second year. We also teach towards the end of year one a small component on your first piece of NEA, which is like a coursework sort of a assignment, and it's 10% of the A level. In fact, my first year students are just working on this at the moment. We look at some Thomas Hardy poems, and we select one to write about in close detail. We'll teach you a selection of the poems. We give you a selection of essay titles. You choose a title, you choose the poem that we've taught you, and you produce a 1,000-word essay, which is a close, detailed analysis of the poem. Probably kind of similar to some of the things that you've done at GCSE. All of this is exactly what you would expect from a literature course. We're looking at language that's used by writers for an artistic purpose that tries to tell us something about life, and they express their emotions about the way they think or feel about life, and maybe try and influence us readers to think or feel certain things as well. So all of this is pretty much standard. What we probably do a little more of at A level than you've perhaps done at GCSE is, for instance, when we're looking at Rossetti and Ibsen, we'll have a bit of a detailed look at the society around those writers and the influences on them that try and shape the way that they write their text and the ideas that they put into their text. When we think about any use of language that we have, it is all context dependent. The way I'm talking to you now is very much dependent on the fact that I'm doing a lesson to, I don't know how many people. I've never seen your faces before. So I'm talking in a certain way that's trying to, I hope, to engage lots of different listeners. Writers have got different sets of problems, but they're using language in a particular way. And with literature, we're looking at poetry, prose, drama. How do our writers use those forms of language to try and make us think or feel certain things and to entertain us? You know, Shakespeare, when he's writing Hamlet, is always about making a book. He's wanting to make some money out of the play. He was the most popular playwright at the time, and for a reason, he knew how to write a crowd pleaser. So that's the first year. Let's have a think about the second year. Okay, we look at the theme of dystopia in the second year. That's the major part of what we do. There's one or two other little bits, but our major focus for paper 2, which is what we're going to be preparing you for in the second year, is dystopia. And I think that's kind of a new concept, perhaps, for some of us, if we've come from GCSE. What do we think dystopia is? Now, as this is quite difficult to do interactive at this part of the lesson, I'm not going to let you send me in lots of ideas. I'm sure you've all got some great ideas about what dystopia is, and I'm sure you've all come across dystopian texts, books, novels that you've read, films that you've seen. But for this lesson, I'm going to go through some of the kind of key characteristics. There are lots of things you could say about dystopia. When we get into the second year, we'll explore loads of these different possibilities. But for now, let's have a look. It's an imagined future where society's gone wrong. Really basic definition. I can remember last year as I was going on my usual favourite walks, and there's suddenly nobody about. And we're in lockdown thinking, why do I teach dystopia? We're living through a dystopia. Only in some ways we are. But more seriously, these texts, hopefully not for much longer. Hopefully we're getting there. This is an imagined society where something has gone wrong. Okay. Perhaps society has become some form of a dictatorship where you've got one person or one group controlling society. And unlike the way we live our lives here in the West and in Britain, we have elections every 4 or 5 years. We choose our leaders. We choose our councillors. We have elections for that. We have a free press. We've got everyone is equal under the eyes of the law. So it's not a dictatorship. We live in a democracy. What would happen to our lives if we were in a dictatorship? How would they be different? What would that feel like? What would be the implications for us as human beings in the long run? Would that mean that individual freedoms are gone? You know, I can say what I like within reason. Everything's got to be within reason. You know, even freedom has its boundaries, but we can say what we like. We've got the freedom to think the things that we want to. What would happen? What would that be like if our freedoms are gone? Dystopian fiction, and lets us imagine what would society feel like to us if those changes happened. Okay. We also sometimes get in dystopia what we call an apocalyptic future, where there is no recognizable society. Now, since the 1950s really onwards, we've had some great examples of apocalyptic dystopian futures where societies, for one reason or other, wiped out. And I bet you've all seen loads of films which use that sort of premise as a basis for that kind of thing. Any of those 28 Days Later zombie films are a form of apocalyptic future. And it's a kind of serious form of literature that people have been writing. As I say, it kind of took off more from the 50s onwards, after human beings first invented and used atom bombs. So that's another kind of dystopia. And one we become increasingly more conscious of, perhaps since the end of the 20th century, as I start maturing into an older adult, and before you guys were born, environmental disaster, which would radically alter the way we live. Writers often, think about these serious issues in life that shape the way we might interact with each other, shape our experience of being alive. And they imagine what would happen if the worst came to the worst. What's the worst possible scenario? And that's what dystopia involves us looking at. Sometimes they're reflective of what we might think of as a satire. And satire is where you exaggerate a feature of something to show its weaknesses, its foibles. And you might do it in a comic way, or you might do it in a serious way. But sometimes dystopias are satires on society. In some ways, Gulliver's Travels, one of the earliest novels written in English, and one of the sort of godfathers of the novel as a form of writing. When Gulliver goes to Lilliput, that is a satire on the government at the time that Jonathan Swift thought were some problems with it. So it's a really old version of satire, but you get that in modern day texts all the time. Okay, so second paper in the second year, we look at dystopia, and we have two ways of doing that. The exam board will give us some questions where we've got an unseen prose extract, and with one of your teachers, because you have two teachers for English literature, two in the first year, two in the second year. We kind of split the workload between us. One of the teachers will take you through lots of different extracts and get you to look at some of the kind of different styles of dystopia and some of the different ideas that dystopian writers are using. And the other one will lead you through two novels, which you'll compare in the exam. And that's where I want to take the rest of this lesson, to think about one of those novels. So before I do that, a few more points about dystopia, but you might, if you're a bit of a TV addict, as many of us are, you might recognize the character at the back of this background, okay? So why dystopia? As I say, often writers will look at the society they live in and take a trend or an idea that's popular or emerging and exaggerate that trend or idea to create their dystopian world. Now, George Orwell's 1984 is the one of the earliest and most influential dystopian novels ever written. I strongly recommend it as a great thing to read if you've not. Quite often when I'm doing these kind of taster lessons for literature, students ask, what's the best way for me to prepare in between doing GCSEs and starting an A-level course? What should I do? Should I read ahead of some of the text courses? And I'm always a bit hesitant to say do that, but I would definitely recommend reading some real classic literature. And George Orwell's 1984 would be a great place to start, and actually might help you in one of the exams as well. So 1984, one of the most influential dystopian novels ever written. Orwell criticizes fascism and communism by creating a future Britain called Airstrip 1. So the name of the country's changed, and it's ruled by this shadowy dictator, Big Brother. It controls all aspects of people's lives, even to the extent of creating thought crime and what we call newspeak. Now, I'm just going to unpack that idea of thought crime. How could something be a thought crime? Well, the idea was that Big Brother was so determined to control every aspect of the population that even thinking thoughts like, I'm not sure whether the government should have done that, would be allowed. And that would be a thought crime, which would be punishable. And another thing that Orwell was so clever in inventing in this novel, and sort of so prescient, able to foresee what the future might bring, was he invented this idea that the party, Big Brother, wanted to bring in what he called in the novel newspeak, where they actually started changing language and stripping away lots of different words so that our vocabulary as human beings who speak English gets reduced and reduced and reduced. So we're not actually left with the words to express anything that will be critical of the government. And there's an interesting kind of idea here that relates to some of the language aspects of things that we teach as well. How much of what we think is shaped by the words that we have? If we haven't got a word for something, can we think it anymore? Do we only think in words? Now, it's an interesting idea, but George Orwell, along with many other great ideas, raises that in this novel with this idea of newspeak. How much does language control what we think? I'll leave you to ponder that one. I think there's probably a midway ground where sometimes language shapes a bit of what we think, and sometimes um, it's actually we're not thinking in terms about words. To give you a really basic kind of idea, when I'm hungry, I think about how my stomach feels, and I don't put that into words. And I might have an image of chips throating through my mind, or a nice sandwich or something. But I'm probably not using words first. But on other times, I will do. So, dictatorship, newspeak, creating something new, exaggerating the way that propaganda was being used at the time Orwell's writing this book. It's part of the kind of ingredients that Orwell's using to write this fabulous novel, 1984, which is a great example of this terrific genre, dystopia. I love it. I realized when I started teaching dystopia that I had read loads of it. And I think I started reading novels seriously. It was dystopian novels that I really first went for without really knowing what they were. Anyway, what does this allow Orwell to do? Well, it allows him to illustrate the terrors of dictatorship through the eyes of an everyman protagonist, Winston Smith. Now, I've underlined those two words, everyman and protagonist. Everyman is a little bit sexist and old-fashioned these days. We might want to change that to every person. But the idea is that quite often in literature, not just in dystopia, but in many different forms of literature, there are characters there who are like you and I, who are quite normal. They're not superheroes. They're not gifted with great strength, mega intelligence. You know, they're not the Sherlock Holmes type characters who can think their way out of anything. They're people like you and I who are flawed, who are kind of physically a bit weak, perhaps, or not as fit as we could be. So that they represent all of us and we can relate to that person. Protagonist is a kind of literary term you've probably come across before, but it means the central character, the main character, the hook that gets us all involved in whatever story, be it a novel, maybe in a poem, if it's a narrative poem, or in drama. They're the character that we're kind of rooting for and relating to. Now look at the name Orwell chooses. As a good literature teacher, I think all the details count. I never think things are just done randomly. And over an A-level course, I would try and hope to foster that spirit within you that you can think about why things are done. Now, as the last little bullet point says there, the novel's written in 1948, 3 years after the end of the Second World War. It's written by an English writer in Britain. And when we think of famous wartime figures from the Second World War, we probably think of Winston Churchill. So this everyman figure is named after a great hero of the Second World War. Got the same first name, Winston. So there's something kind of brave and noble and something perhaps determined about this character, but then he's called Smith. Now, it was a big cliche when I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s. I really am that old, that Smith was a common name, that everybody was called Smith. So Smith kind of relates that idea of him being an everyman. On the one hand, there's a side of his character that's brave and wants to be determined and fight against corruption and inequality and dictatorship. But on the other hand, there's a normal human being like you or I, Smith, who could be any of us, could be all of us. And it's a way for Orwell to sink generation after generation of readers into this novel so we can relate to this guy and we can think what it's like to live his life and think what it would be like to live under those conditions. One of the great things about studying literature is it develops our skills of empathy, about thinking what it's like to be other people and living life through their shoes. Obviously, we all want you to get the best qualification we can do. But one of the nice things about teaching a subject like English literature is that I hope that we can help you become a more thoughtful human being, a more rounded human being, someone who's perhaps a bit more conscious of how other people think and feel, because you're a bit more empathetic. Because reading lots of good fiction apparently does that to us, according to psychological studies. And who are we to argue with psychologists? Let's move on to the next little bit and see if we can get a little bit more detailed and think about something which is an example of what we do. I said that we compare two texts, and we do. In the second year, part of our dystopia work is to compare the terrific novel, The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, with the equally as terrific Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And the exam board set this paper up where you have a little extract from an unknown piece of dystopia that you have to write a short analysis of. And then they ask you a big essay question, choice of two, comparing Handmaid's Tale with Fahrenheit 451. Well, what are those texts like? We spend a lot of the year looking at both of those. This is just a little bit of a taste of it. So I'm going to read through this extract here, and then I'm going to give you a few minutes to have a little think about some of these bullet points that I've got at the bottom of the page there. They're very general, okay? So this is from the novel The Handmaid's Tale. Now, you may well have seen the really good dramatization of this novel that's been on Channel 4 over the last 3 or 4 years. The first season was very much according to Margaret Atwood's novel. She wrote it in 1983-84, and it stuck quite closely, fairly closely to the novel. The subsequent seasons, 2, 3, and this one that's just started now, have moved away from that and moved beyond what Margaret Atwood wrote. But this is from the very early in the novel, as it says at the bottom of the screen there. It's an extract from chapter 2, which is just called Shopping. So here's an example of some dystopian fiction. Bear with me while I read through this, and then have a quick read through and look at those questions and have a think about what you would say for some of this. I walk along the hallway, past the sitting room door and the door that leads into the dining room, and open the door at the end of the hall and go through into the kitchen. Here the smell is no longer of furniture polish. Rita is in here, standing at the kitchen table, which is a top of chipped white enamel. She's in her usual Martha's dress, which is dull green, like a surgeon's gown of the time before. The dress is much like mine in shape, long and concealing, but with a bib apron over it and without the white wings and the veil. She puts on the veil to go outside, but nobody much cares who sees the face of a Martha. Her sleeves are rolled to the elbow, showing her brown arms. She's making bread, throwing the loaves for the final brief kneading and then the shaping. Rita sees me and nods, whether in greeting or in simple acknowledgement of my presence, it's hard to say, and wipes her floury hands on her apron and rummages in the kitchen drawer for the token book. Frowning, she tears out 3 tokens and hands them to me. Her face might be kindly if she would smile, but the frown isn't personal. It's the red dress she disapproves of and what it stands for. She thinks I may be catching, like a disease or any form of bad luck. Sometimes I listen outside closed doors, a thing I never would have done in the time before. Don't listen long, because I don't want to be caught doing it. Once, though, I heard Rita say to Cora that she wouldn't debase herself like that. Nobody's asking you, Cora said. Anyways, what could you do, supposing? Go to the colonies, Rita said. They have the choice. With young women and starve to death and Lord knows what all, said Cora. Catch you. It's a very short little extract. Just have a quick reread through that. And do send us a comment in a second, because I'm reaching the end of my part of this, and then I'm going to try and answer some of the questions that you're sending when I can get to that part of the screen. What differences do you notice from the society that we live in? How does this seem different and strange and unusual? What kind of society do you think Atwood has created here? Who are the people involved? You might want to think about that. Where is the setting? Where is this very short little piece of action taking place? Who is the narrator, the teller of the story? And have a think about, why might that be important? Why is it important that we have certain people telling us a story? Why might the story be different if somebody else was telling the story? So I'm going to leave that on the screen for a couple of seconds and let you have a look at that. And then in a couple of minutes, I'll alter the screen and then I can look at your questions. And if any of you feel like you can send us in some comments and want to be brave and do that, I really admire that. And I will look through and review what you've put. Okay, so I'm going to be here, but I'll let you do some reading. Actually, I've not got very much time, have I? Okay, folks, I'm going to go to the. I haven't given you much time there. I appreciate that. If you've managed to get a comment out, I really respect you for doing that. I'm going to stop the sharing bit here and hopefully have a look at any questions that we might have coming in. And right, okay, we've got 6 questions. Let's have a quick look. Um, how many lessons, asked Courtney, will there be per week or fortnight? Well, we usually, unless anything changes in between now and next academic year, which I don't expect it to, we have a weekly timetable. You have 4 lessons per week, and they're an hour and 10 minutes each lesson. You have 2 teachers for English literature. Not every A-level subject does it in the kind of style that we do. So one teacher will do one half of the course, and in the first year, that means you'll have a teacher for your Shakespeare, Hamlet work, and another teacher will take you through the Rossetti and the Ibsen. And then in the second year, one teacher will take you through the Handmaid's Tale and the Fahrenheit 451, and the other teacher will take you through another piece of coursework, which I haven't actually talked about in this presentation. But the other teacher will do the sort of unseen prose, this kind of work. So 4 lessons a week, hour and 10 minutes each lesson, 2 teachers, 2 lessons each. Nita's put, during the summer, I'm trying to read more. Have you got any recommendations? Absolutely. Georgia Orwell 1984 would be a great place to start. In the first year, we also do some older text. So I'm going to recommend something that I've loved since I was about your age, anything by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is one of my personal favorites, or Emma. She only wrote 5 novels. You can't go wrong with any of those, but I would recommend those. Because we're looking at some Victorian stuff, you might want to try some Charles Dickens. Now, you always kind of divides readers. You either love him or hate him. I'm one of the people who loves him. Great Expectations is one of my favorite novels, so that's worth a try, and it's not too long for a Dickens novel. You could also consider Thomas Hardy. Test of the D'Urbervilles is absolute classic. So's Far from the Madding Crowd. They're both very readable. I think having a reading of some really good text like that, which are classic text, will improve your reading skills and give you a good basis for the second year. Right, Arlo sent us a comment about The Handmaid's Tale here. Women have to be covered up with wings and long clothes. These changes to women have been dictated by men, so perhaps that is being critical of how men control women in our modern society. Arlo, that's a really perceptive comment. Well done. Women have to wear veils to go outside. Danielle's put there, and it links into what Arlo said there. You'll see this when we look at the text itself, but that is definitely the kind of area that the book goes into. Really nice comments. Thank you. Melissa's put, what's the pass rate? I haven't got the statistics with me for the A stars to Bs, but our overall pass rate A's to E's is usually, for the last 3 years, been 99%. We very rarely don't get everyone through the course. The last couple of years, the pass rates have been a little bit affected by the different way exams have been done, but they're very much in line with national averages, and we get quite a good percent of A stars to Bs in the centre. So I think I calculated in one of my groups this year, we got 60% A stars, A and B. It's not bad, and I think that's fairly representative of the whole department. I would in no way claim that I'm the world's best teacher and I get the best grades. Not at all true. Average class size. Now that does vary a little bit. I've got a class of 16 in one of my literary groups and another one that is 22. 24 is the ceiling. Management won't let classes go bigger than 24, but they quite often have classes which are much smaller. And the smaller the class size, the more attention you get from your teachers. I think I'm probably going to have to answer the rest of these questions through one of the offline forums. So I'm going to finish my presentation to you there. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I've managed to answer some of your questions. Have a lovely summer, and we hope to see you in August signing up for English Literature or the right A-level course for you. Thank you so much, people. Goodbye.